right, so today we're taking another look at sculpting inside of Maya. Today we're also going to be adding in Booleans. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I'm just going to take you through a really basic workflow. It doesn't have to get too terribly crazy here. So I'm going to start looking at building a mask. So let's scale this thing up. It's going to be kind of like maybe like a kabuki style mask, or I don't know, skull mask. It's going to be a mask of some kind. Doesn't really matter what style I make, to be honest. I'm going to crank this thing up to 100 by 100, its current scale. The reason I do that inside of Maya is to make sure that my units are large enough here, that my object is large enough that when I come into my brushes, that the units work out pretty well. So that I don't have to have a brush that's like 0.01 size. I can have a brush that's 10 units or something along those lines. All right. So let me quickly slice and dice this guy. Oops. I'm doing this with my multi-cut tool and middle mouse click. This just helps me make sure that I've got some nice consistent central edges. Okay, so that when I use symmetry here in just a second, everything works out pretty well. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and add in a cylinder really fast. I'm going to hold J, rotate this thing down 90 degrees, scale it down. Just so that it's roughly the size of an eye that I might want, and position this thing in a spot. Now, when I have these two things, I don't actually need to do the other eye because it's gonna all get squished together, Booleaned together here in a second, and I'm going to use symmetry for my rebuild. So this whole side here currently exists just so that I have an idea of placement of proportions. All right, and then I'm going to come in, right click, hold, go back to object mode, and grab this guy. I'm going to hold shift, and I'm going to pop this here, hold V, let's snap this to the central vertex. There we are. So that way this will be a hole for the mouth, this will be a hole for the eye, and all this will be some sort of upper mask area. All right, so I'm going to grab this cube and then shift select the two cylinders. I will then go to mesh. You may or may not be able to see this. Looks like you can because I'm changing up my recording principle here, basing it off the screen, and I'm going to go to difference A minus B. Okay, now you'll notice that those two cylinders turned red, and you'll see over here on this right hand side that I have my Boolean window open. Okay, now this area with the orange, it says P cube, that's our main object, and the P cylinder 1 and 2 have gray, and they're below the P cube, which means those are functioning as a tool. And we're on difference, which means they will cut a hole out. Okay, so now in order to make these holes permanent, I need to grab all of those and come up here either to delete by type, which is right here, or my preference is to go to edit, delete all by type, because this is a model, not an animation, and hit history. And now polysurface 1 exists only, right? And so we've unified this those models, and we've gotten rid of the history for the Boolean. All right, now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a rebuild on this. We talked about this in class. I'm going to go to Mesh. I'm going to come down here, Retopologize, not actually a remesh, but a Retopologize. And I'm going to select my options, which didn't seem to select. Mesh, Retopologize, option. Popped itself onto a different window. Here we go. So now you'll see that we have our keep original, we have our target face count. Currently we don't know how many faces we have on this. It's an easy thing to check. If you go to display, heads up display, and turn on poly count, and you can see that the object currently has 64 faces. Our current target face has 1,000 faces, so that should be more than enough. Hard edges, we could turn them on or leave them off. Let's go ahead and turn them on for now. I'm also going to turn on symmetry. You can see that we have our X symmetry axis right here, and down here it says positive X to negative X. All right, so let's turn this on, object X, and then let's go ahead and hit Retopologize. Now again, Retopologize will close the window. If I hit apply, it will perform the function of Retopologize, but it will leave the window open in case I need to change some settings and make adjustments without having to reopen the window. I'm pretty confident with this, so I'm just going to hit Retopologize. It's going to pop up this troubleshoot potential Retopologize issues. I'm just going to hit ignore and continue. All right, so now you can see that it's taken that eye from the right hand side and it's copied it over to the left, and the mouth looks good, everything looks fine, and we're set up in a place where now we can move into deleting the history on this and sculpting. Okay, so I'm going to delete the history on that object, and we have a hole for the eyes, we have a hole for the mouth, and we can start to sculpt. So I'm going to come up to the top right hand corner and come down to sculpting mode. It's going to think for just a second. You'll notice that it changes the workspace, gives us a lot more room to sculpt. Alright, and I'm just holding Alt and moving myself around like this by touching the screen while holding Alt and rotating around my object. I can also hold this Alt and right click with my pen or my mouse and zoom in and out. You can also come up here to this little icon, directional icon, and just touch it with your pen or your mouse and rotate yourself around. Pretty simple movement. On the right hand side, you'll see that we have our tool settings. This is important because your sculpting brushes, which should have opened on their own, if they didn't, let's say that you're in polymodeling, then just hit your sculpting tab up here in your dock. Those all function inside of tool settings. All the settings for the brushes exist over here in tool settings. So I'm going to start off with our grab brush. Certain programs call this a move brush. but here in Maya, I believe it's called the grab brush. All right, so my object was already selected, so now you can see that sculpting on polysurface shape is there. I also have object X turned on, and I'm in the X. So now I can start to push and pull this as we go. All right. And B allows me to increase and decrease the size of the brush. So I'm holding B and touching the pen to the screen and moving left and right, which increases and decreases the size of the brush. So B for brush. All right. Now, like I said, once the brush is selected on the right hand side in your tool settings, you'll see the size of the brush as well, right? You'll also see size units. You can base this off of the world or screen size. I just tend to keep it on the size of the world most of the time. You also have the direction, which is based off the screen currently, and you have a few other choices down here, like your fall off. Now, personally, fall off, I tend to change my brush to be something like this. This is how I like my brush. It feels a little bit more like either any of the other sculpting programs that I've used, and it helps my hands stay consistent. And because of that, I will save this custom brush so if I lose it, I can come right back to it. All right, so now I'm just going to start pushing and pulling this thing into shape. I'm using a really big brush right now, so you might think, well, the results you're getting seem strange. Well, the size of the brush always matters. If you're not getting the details you want, check the size of the brush, but also check the level of detail that you have in the model as far as like the size of the faces and your face count. Now, while we're sculpting, we're looking for, at this stage, profiles. I just want to get something that is interesting, and I'm also trying not to wreck my model. It's because this is a mask, I know it has to go onto a face somewhat, so I'm going to try to mimic some general face shapes so that it looks like it could actually fit onto a humanoid of some kind. You know, maybe this is a human, maybe this goes onto a troll, or who knows, right? But I'm going to try to put some level of story into this as well. Now, as we sculpt, because we started off with such a hard shape, you're going to see that there are these hard edges. If we want to smooth out the surface, you can hold down your Shift key and paint across the surface, and it will smooth these edges a little bit. You can continue to paint to increase the effect of smooth. There you go. Notice how it's rounding out those corners really nice. Nice. I tend to go into sculpting mode. I'll sculpt for a little bit and then I'll smooth what I've done a little bit, and I sculpt a little bit more and I smooth a little bit more, just back and forth over and over to try to maintain my shapes, but also try to keep my geometry from destroying itself, which it will slowly destroy itself if you're not careful. Again, if we want a smaller brush, you come down, you hit B, hold B, I should say. This is going to allow me to get into this eye socket a little nicer. Smooth around that. I'm still thinking about how does this thing actually fit onto the head? Can I make it look a little bit more comfortable on the inside? And in some sense, maybe I don't have enough. I might not have enough faces to do that. Might not have enough geometry here to really make it look comfortable to an actual humanoid face. I should say a human face, yeah. So I'm kind of basing it off of that. It's currently pretty thick, that's fine. I don't mind that. But I am thinking about proportions. You're going to get to a point where you see that your faces are starting to break a little bit. If that's the case, and you think, well, I need to do a rebuild, then do a rebuild. That's kind of where I'm at right now. So I'm going to come back up here to Mesh. I'm going to do another retopologize. I'm going to go back in my options. And I'm going to increase the number of faces. At this point, I think I'm going to try 10,000. Really crank this thing up. I'm going to turn hard edges off. I don't need hard edges anymore. I think it looks fine the way it is. And I'm just going to let it build based off of the existing topology and its existing shape. I'm going to keep my symmetry on just in case something somehow got out of symmetry. And hit retopologize. Again, it's going to throw up that warning. It does that pretty much every time. But you can see now that it's retopologized and I have significantly more faces, 10 times more roughly. And I'm going to go over this again with just a little bit of a smooth pass. Just to ensure that there's nothing funky going on here. Kind of smooth up some of those rough bumps and stuff that you get from modeling in low poly, especially here on the inside where this is supposed to be nice and smooth and comfortable for the wearer's face to reside, right? Okay, we can add all the texture in on the outside if we choose. There we go. That looks much nicer. So now we've got a decent start. And you can continue to refine this. Refine the shape, perhaps. Maybe we want something that looks a little bit more evil. Maybe. Smooth that out just a little. Smooth this just a little. There we go. I'm trying to find a nice way to get some nice story kind of put into this. Increase my brush just a little bit. Let's look at this from the right side. All right, it's coming along pretty cool. In class, one of the questions that came up was, how do I add something like horns? So if this is something like a kabuki mask, then that's a pretty common addition to a mask. So let's go ahead and look at how we would do something like that before we get into the rest of the build and the other brushes, because we want to make sure that this is fleshed out as much as possible before we move on. For this, I'm probably going to need quite a few to add horns, depending on how big and crazy I get. I'm going to need quite a few more faces in order to pull a horn off of this surface. So I'm going to increase my count considerably. I'm going to come up here, edit, delete all by type, history, delete that, and then I'm just going to do a subdivision. I think the topology currently is fine, but if I come to my modeling tools and open that window, it went somewhere. Jump to the other screen because that's just where I wanted it to be. I'm going to mount this right here, okay? I'm going to hit smooth, okay? So what this did is it multiplied the number of faces by 4. It subdivided each face horizontally and vertically. So this probably is going to be enough faces to move forward. So I will pop over here, delete that, and then I'm going to right click and hold, go to vertex mode. I'm going to find a good spot. So if I hit B, that goes into soft select mode, and if I hold B, I can increase a soft selection, right? I'm going to look at this guy and say, where do I want horns? Maybe I want them right in this neighborhood, maybe here. That might be good. And then we'll come in to our move tool, and let's just pull this horn off. How does that look? Okay. And let's add a little life to this with the rotate tool. Something like this. Maybe we twist them out a little bit. Maybe we move them out a little bit. Not bad. I'm going to actually undo that because I think based on this portion of the skull, I feel like it needs to be centered more over this way. There we go. And that builds us this interesting triangle on the face as well. All right, so let's again just yank that up and off the face, and we'll rotate, zoop, something like this. Maybe we move them out a little bit. Maybe we rotate them again, something like that. You can always move these up or in if we think they're currently a little odd looking or not. You can always change the shape. Okay. It's not too bad. I can get behind that. All right. So let's just say that we're happy with this, so that I'm not just piddling around on this tutorial for the next 7 hours with horns. If I'm happy with that, then I will come over and do another rebuild. Okay, so let's go back into Mesh. First, right-click Object Mode. Okay, so this is what it looks like currently. Not bad. Sometimes it's a whole lot more helpful to throw it into something like this, so you can actually see what's going on. I am going to do a quick smooth over that area because that soft select seemed to grab just a little bit of the area behind it. Okay. Alright, so let's come back up here. Mesh, retopologize. We were on 40,000 faces. So let's just stick with that. Keep your symmetry on, retopologize, ignore that. Let it think about things for a little bit. It's important to make sure that you're consistently deleting the history on these, just to keep the memory usage for your computer way down. Sculpting in Maya can be a pretty intense process, and even more so if you're forgetting to delete the history, because it has all versions of that model locked into your computer, kind of in like a cache situation, which is not good for your computer, not good for your model. Alright, so again, you can see that this ends up a little bit chunky, and it's because it was trying to figure out how to model around all the crunchy geometry from the soft select extrusion of sorts. It's not technically an extrusion, but you know, we use soft select and we pulled those faces off of the surface. And now I'm going to come back in, smooth those out, get rid of that crunch. Now sometimes you might look at that and you're like, actually I kind of like that texture. If that's so, then stick with it. If not, well, do what I'm doing right now and get rid of it. Alright, so now we can come in. I'm going to do a little smooth on that nose. Looks like there was a little bit of a crunch in there as well. Alright, a little bit of crunch on that eye. Beautiful. Not too shabby. Okay. Geometry. When we do another rebuild or two, this geometry will continue to smooth itself out, the topology itself. But right now, it doesn't look too bad. I'd say it's serviceable. The eye could definitely be better, nose hole could definitely be better, but you know, it understood how to go around the horns and so forth pretty well. If you were to take this into Final, you would retopologize it anyway by hand. to make sure it was as efficient as possible. Okay, so now we've done a decent bit with our move tool. Let's go into our standard brush. This brush is going to allow us to push and pull and really start to design the surface. So if you paint with this or sculpt with it across your surface, the surface will raise up and fall down, right? If you hold down your control, you can push into the surface. Now, one thing is to make sure you don't push so far that you see this black pop through here. That's actually the back side of the model. You've pushed the front of your model through the back, so you definitely don't want that. Again, shift is still going to turn into the smooth brush, so you don't have to worry about getting too crazy and not being able to smooth things out. That's simple. Looked like that central edge loop right there was getting bunched up just a little bit, which is why you see me smoothing across that right now, just to keep things from bunching up and overlapping. Alright, that looks a little nicer. Now, we're going to need to do a little bit of sculpting here, start bringing out some details, but one thing I want to show you is each brush is individual. My fall off I adjusted on this, but the fall off was adjusted for the grab brush. It was not adjusted for my standard brush, so standard sculpting brush. So luckily I saved my custom curve, so I came down here and selected that. And now as I sculpt, things should start to feel a little closer to the standard feel of a brush as I like them, right? Like I said, as I sculpt, I tend to sculpt a little, smooth a little, sculpt a little, smooth a little. My brush is a little small right now. Alright, a little bit of smooth, a little bit of sculpting. Push this in just a little bit. So sculpt negatively. Now you might see that it actually looks like my topology might still be a little low. For this, because the end result is still getting a touch crunchy. If that's the case, and currently I think it is the case, it feels a touch low for me, for my liking. So what I'm going to do is do a subdivide on this and get myself up to about 160,000 faces. So over 100,000 faces usually on an object like this is when I start feeling like it's moving a little nicer. Like these eyebrows, these faces are still kind of big, bigger than I tend to like them to be when I sculpt. So yeah, I will say the smaller faces are easier to move more often than not. So, or I'm sorry, the larger faces are easier to move, but they tend to get crunchy. So if you're gonna be doing any smoothing or detail work, you need more faces. Alright, so I'm going to come over to my tools. Let me go to poly modeling, delete my history on this, and then I'm going to hit smooth. That's going to throw me into 160,000 faces. Maybe that'll be enough. We're going to stick with that for now and just see. So I'll delete my history on that. Come back in to my sculpting tool and let's see how that feels. All right. brush down a little bit, get some of these finer details. Okay. Yeah, this is looking pretty cool. Anytime I have an area that I'm trying to push forward or get some sort of like bellowing out like this, you want to find the edge of that, or I try to find the edge of that and push it in a little bit. Helps to accentuate that area, right? Gives it kind of a bulbous kind of area, pushes things around. And I'm just trying to work with the surface details now, right? I'm not really getting too crazy with the overall profile, because the profile should have been taken care of for the most part in the earlier stages. So I'm thinking about like secondary details at this point. So what's this mask look like once you start getting a little closer to it? Maybe there are a few little touches I can do something with, but I'm still trying not to mess with the overall profile too much. Let's do a little something here. What's this look like if we pull this in? Something like that. Maybe I smooth that a little bit. I could pull a little bit of something into these guys. I'm trying to find some shapes that I'm starting to establish, and I'm tracking those shapes through the model, echoing across the design. Go. Let me do something like this. Pull this back. Oh, that's fun. Let's play with this little edge design, maybe. go. So I'm still staying within the general profile that I set up for myself. Let me smooth out some of the crunch that was going on there. I just dust over it real lightly, nothing too crazy, just a quick dusting. Made that look a little nicer. I don't have to get too crazy here at all. Just going to add a little detail around this horn. Make it look like maybe it's inset, or you know, like the way a deer horn or a lot of different animal horns have a touch of bone that essentially surrounds the horn itself and kind of anchors it into the skull. Also adds just a nice bit of accent to the area. Which is fun. Yeah, that's kind of cool. All right, now at this stage, I might actually do a rebuild on this just because we're getting some topology that's building up in some areas that is different than the shapes that we already have, and different enough from the surface that we rebuilt or retopologized earlier. So it might be a good idea, or a subdivision in and a decent amount of surface change in, to delete the history on this guy, come back up into your mesh. I'm going to go to a retopologize, and we know that we're at 160,000 faces, so I'm just going to set it for 200,000 faces. Okay, I'm going to leave this on, my symmetry, retopologize one more time. This might be the last time I have to retopologize this, unless I do something really drastic. So let's think about this. Like I said, I deleted the history prior, which makes the retopologize operation a little easier because it's not dealing with essentially previous versions of the model while it's thinking about the rebuild. The more faces you ask it to create for the retopologize, the longer this is going to take. So just be ready to wait for a little while if you start cranking this total face count up really, really high. 200,000 is usually about where I stop for a retopo, and after that, if I need more faces, I'll do a smooth operation, a smooth operator. All right, and I'll come in and just do a little bit of smoothing. Now, one thing to note, when you start getting this many faces bundled up on top of each other, it's harder to smooth out any sort of funky shapes that you may have gotten yourselves into, or gotten into here, right? Because they're just so tiny that there's not a whole lot of room for them to move. So be aware and try not to get too wild and crazy with your sculpting. Heavy detail, and then when you think, oh, I'm going to do a, I don't actually like that. That's not what I was shooting for. I was going to carve into it just a little bit, nice and lightly. I'm using a pen, by the way, so that I can take advantage of pressure sensitivity. If you're using a mouse, this is probably going to be a little bit more difficult. All right. What I'm doing is I'm trying to sharpen up some of these transitions so that it feels maybe like this was carved by hand, and just to kind of accentuate the shadow, the way the light plays into this area. The more faces you have, the sharper your details can become. Okay, maybe I want to do something with this mask on the inside. Maybe this thing is like made of wood. And how would I show that? So I could carve down through this. There's actually a sculpting brush that is meant for this type of work. It's right here. It's your slice brush. And there are versions of this that exist in other programs. I'm going to change the spacing on this guy because it's not great currently. I'm going to bring that spacing down considerably. It's still doing like this kind of spotty thing, right? It's kind of gross. I'm also going to come to the fall off. I'm going to change the fall off to be a little rounder. And then dust over that surface just a bit. I'm not actually liking the result that it's given me. It's too choppy. So I'm going to go back to my standard brush because it was doing a better job. It was giving me a nicer look. Let's say that this thing is like made of some slats of wood. Let's do a slice right here. Bring it down. What I'm doing is I'm trying to get more story into this guy. I'm going to bring this slice of wood down. It's gonna look pretty cool, I think, once we get a rebuild on this. Push this through to there. Keep that detail tracking. The idea is that this whole thing is made of slats of wood that somebody has painstakingly fit together, right? And then you can come in and start to mold in some sort of wear and tear. And we'll do a lot of that, a lot more of that, I think, on the inside than the outside. But if you have something you can just keep on carving and carving and carving until you've achieved exactly the level of detail that you want, exactly the level of storytelling that you want. Right now I just have everything set on symmetry as well, just to keep things easy and quick. And I'm going in, I'm doing a little bit of smoothing. To keep it from getting too crunchy. When you subdivide this, you'll be able to clean all that up. That's pretty neat so far. Cool thing is, with textures, materials and textures, you can come in and really start to do something wild with that, right? So you could come in and change the colors. You could add an actual board material, wood material to this. Maybe the center part is painted and these edges are painted, but maybe this is not, or vice versa. Maybe this is all wood and this is all wood, but this is all painted. That could be pretty sick. A lot of cool stuff that you can do here. Really, the sky is the limit. At this point, I think I'm going to call it done enough for this tutorial. The only thing that I would show at this point that you might be interested in is alphas. So if I did want to come in and do a little bit more texturing on this, one, this probably doesn't have enough face count yet, so I would still want to come in delete the history on this, and then do a subdivision. One more smooth. Let it think about it. There we go. I'm now up to a whole lot of faces. 700, almost 800,000 faces. I will go to poly modeling, delete my history, go back into sculpting, select my brush, select my object. I now have lots and lots of faces, just under 1 million. And if I wanted to add some kind of texture to this, I could do so in my tool settings through stamp. If I scroll down, I can say use stamp, pick stamp. It's going to open a stamp window up above right here. And now I can come in and start to use any of these textures, any of these alpha maps to inform some level of texture on my object. So maybe I wanted to do something like, I don't know, maybe like these leaf veins, right? So something along these lines, so you have a positive and a negative of that leaf vein. You also have this bristle feel. So if I select any of these, let's just select this leaf vein for now. I can come in and paint. Now, this is going to look terrible because it's going to paint with a repeating pattern. So something like this is actually meant to be used with a stamp. So if I were to come in and grab this stamp, I could come in and pull my texture out like so. Now it switched stamps on me. Let me undo. Let me make sure that I have the proper brush set. There we go. And we're inside of our stamp. Let me grab again and pull out. And this is pretty extreme, right? Now, the reason it's so extreme is because our strength is entirely too high. So we would want to come down. Let's bring that strength way, way down. Something along those lines. And I'm actually going to take and turn off my symmetry at this point, because I don't need it doubling my detail. And you can get something like this, right? So now you get this interesting detail. That's still, maybe it's too high. What if we took this down to like 0.5? These things can get a little nutty. And let's find a good area for it. Maybe something like this. And you can kind of warp it around and do some fun stuff. There we go. Maybe you want to take this and add it in across this area. Maybe we pull it in here and right there. Right, so this becomes now our heavily textured area. And you could do the same thing on these edges. Now, if it were me, I'd turn my symmetry back on here just so that we can hit that other side. The nice thing is you just keep your hand on that undoes and you can get rid of the stuff you don't like really quick. And now you've got these two strips, kind of like I was talking about before, where there's some level of detail. And if you didn't want detail here, you would just come back in maybe to your smooth brush or your standard brush. Let's shrink the brush down a little bit, and I'm going to smooth some of that out in this area. That way I'm only I'm only getting these wild details where I actually want them. So this is one thing in sculpting. There's a back and forth that you're going to be doing. Sculpt into a thing, you sculpt back out of a thing, do a little bit of smoothing on the thing, fix it back the way you want it. Yeah, I think for the most part I'm relatively happy with this. I just realized I have my texture still turned on for the sculpting portion of this, so I need to turn that off. That's one thing to constantly keep in mind, is if you turn on stamp, you're going to have to turn it back off if you don't want it at the next stage of sculpting. It doesn't just turn itself off because you've switched to a different brush. Alright, so that's a fun way to add detail into your sculpts. I'm going to smooth this out a little bit. It's a little much for me, for my taste. Let me increase the size of my brush a little. Even though I'm going to keep a lot of that, some of it gets a little crunchy. So again, I just dust over the surface, smooth it a little. I'm keeping most of it. The light, the shadow, are still playing off of that. They're still showing me a lot of that interesting detail, but I don't need it to be so extreme. Go. And this is one thing too with the stamp, is the stamp actually blows right through your object, which maybe you're okay with, maybe you're not. So just keep that in mind, that as I'm dusting over this part, but I was pressing really hard right there to obliterate that stamp in that particular area. The nice thing is your smooth brush does not go all the way through your object. So you can dust across the surface and just fix the areas you want to fix without obliterating everything on the front side of your object, which is nice. Right. So for the most part, I think we're pretty good here. Like I said, if it were me, I would just keep doing these little dusting and sculpting passes, little by little, just to make sure things aren't too terribly crunchy. It's possible I would do one more rebuild on this just to get the topology inside of those nooks and crannies that we carved in to look like boards. Smooth those in a little bit, kind of pull that into the topology, unify it a little bit, the design with the topology itself, which is a nice thing to think about. Certainly helps at later stages, especially if we were to like take this and maybe break the mask apart into different pieces or anything like that. Typically things like animation, those are considered way ahead of time, so that you would build your topology accordingly. All right, so there we go. I'm gonna exit out of that tool, and this is the new mask. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and until next time.